bits are more or less. Oh, yes. I think we all know if you do not wish to be recorded, then you can turn off your visual joining. Yeah. So I've got it, yes, and I hope others have as well. Well, let's make a start then. Could you put up my PowerPoint, please, Tiziana? Where is it? Oh, there we go. Yes. Excellent. Thank you. You're right. Well, this is part 2 of banking and ethics, and some of you may have missed last week's, but I think you will know by now that we made a recording of it, and the recording is available on YouTube. And I think Tiziana, my good friend and host this evening, has already sent the details, the link to the YouTube. It shouldn't be too difficult, I think, to pick up on the themes and ideas we've been discussing. But if you have a chance, if you've not seen it already, then please follow up with the YouTube version. Yes, I think we can say the vision is okay, at least from my side, and I think the sound is equally good enough. So move on. I've asked Rosie. Rosie offered us, no, hang on. Rosie offered us a 3-part contribution to this affair. 2 we had last week on the theme of education each other and taking action, and we held over this question of engagement until this week, partly because we need to have a little space, I think, between these events to just relax and understand what's been said and maybe raise questions or doubts or misunderstandings or whatever it might be. So I'm going to ask in a few minutes, when I've done a little bit of introduction here, just to ask Rosie to take over and present some thoughts to us on engagement with the financial sector and how we move towards a more effective and more useful, a more people and environment friendly version of banking than we seem to have, or finance in general, actually. I have in mind just saying a few words after that about the general theme of investment, which is moves on a step, I think, from banking. We can only think about investing if we actually have some spare financial capital to think what to do with it. And I'm afraid increasingly that may become a little less likely than we used to have. But nevertheless, it's an important issue, both for ourselves. It raises similar kinds of issues as does banking, and in a way, it's just a one step further down the road, as it were, having a savings account. After which we will have Tiziana talk about community shares in action, and then an open discussion more on the theme, where do we go next, what do we do next. This has been a bit open. I'm sorry? Somebody saying something? Oh. Yeah. How we end, because this will be the last of the 2 parts, quite where we end, I'm still a bit unsure about, but I'm sure something will arise and we can find something to talk about. So let's just move on, please, Tiziana. Oh, yes, this is just a reminder. We had something similar from last week. If you have a comment to make, it would be very valuable to us to know what you have in mind. And if that doesn't work, chat function while you're listening is not the easiest thing to do. But there's an email address there, ecoq@greennet.apc.org. GN stands for GreenNet, a small but very user-friendly internet service provider based in London. I've dealt with them for years, and they suit my personal ethical point of view. Move on, please. Yeah. A quick word about ethics. And I thought I'd bring this in just by way of introduction, really. It goes back, I think, that about 40 years, that seems like a long time ago, that economics lost its ethical standpoint about somewhere around 40 years ago. At that stage, the world seemed to be overtaken by something we now refer to as neoliberalism. And neoliberalism cuts things very much to the bone. It has only one measure of success, or two possibly, one being the mirror image of the other, that success is an increase year by year on profits or reduction in costs, which amounts to the same thing. This may sound familiar. And yet, I think it's important to bear in mind the good news. We still have businesses which are conducted for the common good. The person behind this move was a man called Milton Friedman, a Chicago economist, who proclaimed that the business of business was business, and it isn't up to business to get involved in ethical issues or social issues. So I thought I'd throw that in, just a bit of background, extending the idea of the present presentation back to its origins in what we might broadly call economic thought. So, Rosie, I'd be delighted now if you could take us through some ideas on engagement.
Everyone, it's really lovely to be with you again. Hopefully you can see my slides and hear me clearly. I have some childcare issues tonight, so if there are any interruptions from children, please forgive me, but hopefully we can move swiftly on. I know most of you were on the call last week, so I won't do too much of an introduction to myself, but just that I work for Just Money Movement, an ecumenical charity in the UK, and you may know us by our former name, ECCR, the Ecumenical Council for Corporate Responsibility. And the work that I'm involved with is around education and campaigning, helping Christians connect their faith and their financial decisions, whether that's as individuals or as local congregations. So that was just for those who weren't on the call last week. So I thought just a quick refresher of what we looked at a week ago. We were talking about why we need to be concerned about the behaviour of banks on a range of different issues, including the climate crisis. And we looked at some of the questions that we can ask our banks around how they are owned and structured, what kinds of policies they have in place, for who they do business with and who they finance and lend to. And we looked at different ways of taking action and which might involve contacting our banks and engaging with them, or switching our money away to more ethical, value-led banks. And we heard that really powerful story about the mutual bank from our other speaker. But I thought it'd be good to look tonight a little bit more widely about how we build a movement for fairer, greener finance. Obviously, those of you who've joined the call, this is something that you're interested in. How do we start to engage others? What are the barriers that we might encounter? How can we overcome them? I'm going to leave the stuff around investing for Tony and Tiziana to talk about later on. But I also wanted to share, I think, some reasons that we can be hopeful that there is a stronger and more diverse movement for fairer and greener finance in general. So hopefully things to encourage us as well. But I'd be interested to hear, and you're welcome, please, to use the chat box as we go through, and maybe we can have the conversation later, as to whether conversations about finance and ethics are taking place within the local groups and communities that you're part of, and how widely those conversations are happening. So my rather unscientific assessment is that more and more people and institutions, particularly faith groups, are connecting their concerns around the climate crisis with where their money is. And there's more in the media in general about greener banking and investing. There are more stories coming out about greenwash and about poor behaviour of banks and companies. But at the same time, I think while amongst campaigners and some faith groups, these are beginning to be hot topics, I fear that in the general population, it's still a fairly niche interest. And we are all within our own bubbles, aren't we? So within the bubble that I'm in through my work, I hear about these issues all the time, and on day to day, having conversations with people. But I'm conscious, if I think about my local parish context, Church of England, small parish in Worcester, these topics would very, very rarely be on the table at all unless I put them there. So there really is that need for us to be engaging more people and to find ways of connecting the issues to the things that people are interested in and are concerned about. And I find that when I go and speak with churches and with small groups, that more people make the connection between their spending choices and issues that they are concerned about, like the climate crisis or about poverty and inequality. So lots of people have made shifts in terms of their spending and their lifestyle choices, I'd say, but relatively few make that leap to thinking about banking and investment choices. So we do have a bit of a mountain to climb, and I just shared this quote here about particularly looking back to what we were thinking about last week about values-led banking. So if we take one particular network of those banks, the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, in the UK there are 3 members: Charity Bank, Ecology Building Society and Triodos Bank. Back in 2019, the savings deposits held by those 3 banks was 1.55 billion, completely dwarfed by the big high street banks, unsurprisingly. So really only taking a very, very small part of the total market. I mean, obviously that's not the whole picture in terms of ethical banking. There are building societies, there are community-led banking, there's the mutual banks, which we've been talking about, which are beginning to grow and to start. So that's not the full picture, but I thought it was an interesting statistic just to pull out. Just there's something about the need for more education, for more campaigning, for more opportunities for people to hear about these issues and to want to either to move their money or to engage with the big high street providers. So I thought it might be helpful for us to just a little look at what might be holding people back from engaging with these issues and from taking action, because I think if we can understand that, then we can begin to have really meaningful conversations with people. So I've drawn on in this next slide, and I hope that it's visible enough for you, but I will talk us through it. Some really interesting research by a group based in the UK called the Future Narratives Lab, who've been working very closely with campaigners on ethical finance, with a group called the Finance Innovation Lab, and with ethical finance providers, so with those value-led banks, credit unions, etc. And they did this piece of research where they talked to lots of people about what they understand about the financial system and how they understand their own money. And then they presented this research, which is about the narratives and the beliefs that the general public hold around our money and how we see ourselves and how we see the financial system. And I think this is quite a helpful thing for us to look at, to understand what might be holding people back from doing positive things with their money if they have money, maybe to invest, or if they have they're thinking about their banking. And those things that we might want to tease out are those that challenge some of those narratives that we hold. And I think a lot of it is common sense, but I found it very helpful the way they presented it. So some of the narratives we hold are around embarrassment about our money and not wishing to talk about it. So there's some taboos around it. So that prevents us from having these conversations. Many people feel that they are fairly illiterate when it comes to finances. I mean, that's a kind of common sense of people thinking, I don't know enough about these issues to engage, and through not knowing enough, feeling that they don't have any power. We often don't see ourselves as investors. So if I'm talking to people, I'm talking about investments, people won't make the connection perhaps between the fact that they have a workplace pension, which is invested. They won't see themselves as an investor, even though they're paying into a pension. So there's something about thinking about whether we are investors or not. And the complex motives that we have. So we want financial return or security, perhaps because we have loved ones we want to provide for. I think this is something that comes up in churches, local congregations as well, about managing money well and stewarding it well. If it's being given to us by members for our church's mission and its ministry, we want to do well with that, and we want there to be a church in the future. And so what do we do about ethical investments if there's a perception that we might get a lower financial return? So that's a conversation that happens. And then there's the views that we hold about the financial system. So we see it as something at a distance that belongs to the experts. We feel overwhelmed by the complexity of it because of things that we have known and experienced and read. We lack trust in financial institutions' motives, and we avoid but are not surprised by information about our providers' wrongdoing. So we might bank with a big high street bank. We know, but we don't want to dig too deeply, that we fear for what we might find about how they behave. And the other side of that is that people can be quite skeptical about claims of ethical or sustainable behaviour, because they would see all banks as being basically the same. They're aware of such things like greenwash, so banks that can advertise themselves as investing in climate solutions, but they're very aware that on the other hand they may be still financing fossil fuels. So some of these narratives I think are very understandable, some of them are very true, but some of them might just need some teasing out before we can really engage people in being part of this movement for change. So that's a lot of information to kind of share. But obviously these slides can be made available, and I encourage you to, if you have time, to have a read of the research that the Future Narratives Lab did, because they have lots of recommendations in there as to how we can start to unpick some of these narratives that we might all hold and that might be held by the communities that we engage with. But I think another way to talk about it is, obviously banking is a really helpful way, a good starting point for conversation and engagement, because most people have a bank account and you can start a conversation there. But the way to then lead on from that is to think about our wider financial footprint. So, as I said, what about our pensions? What about any savings that we have? What about investments? What even about which insurance company we choose? All of this is about helping people join the dots between our connection to the financial system. So I think you can use any of these routes in to helping people think about where their money is and what it's doing, whether it's connected to their values and the things that they are concerned about. And what I'd love to see is for more and more people to see this tactic of moving our money and engaging with financial institutions as part of our peace building, part of our work for climate justice, not to see it as something separate that's only really for the experts, or indeed only for people who have wealth. I think that's another way that the narrative can be shaped, because I do think that this is something that all of us have agency and power to do something about, and we need a really broad movement of people. So I think certainly when we think about ethical investment, that has typically been as a conversation to have with people who have wealth, perhaps people who've inherited money, people who are at a particular point in their life where they have money to invest. But if we're seeking really transformative change, then the movement for ethical finance needs to be much bigger than that. So everybody, I believe, should have the opportunity to invest their workplace pension in a fund that brings about positive action in the world, positive change. Everybody should have that option available to them. And in fact, all pension funds should be geared towards that, because if they're about providing security for us, then it's about providing security in a really holistic sense for the global community, so that we have a safe world in which to retire into. And if we look at the other end of the scale at young people, who will be most impacted by the actions of banks and investors today, then they need to have the right education and support to equip them to campaign on these issues too, and to make financial choices in line with their values. So, for example, when they're opening their first bank account or going into the workplace for the first time, and having a pension and understanding what that means and asking the right questions. I think all of us can be involved in building that movement, because all of us can have conversations in our own lives with our own friends, with family, with neighbours who are at those different points in life, that kind of intergenerational conversation that needs to happen. I'm just going to check the chat to check there hasn't been anything. Quite right. I will check the ratios if I haven't quite got the figures right, but I'll look those up for you. Thanks for that question. I will say something very briefly about ethical investing, but I think Tony's going to do a little bit more on this. I think one of the difficulties of people engaging with ethical finance is that there are lots of different labels and approaches, and people find it quite hard to understand the jargon that's associated with ethical investment. So a lot of what we have to do is kind of unpick that for people. Even the word ethical investing sometimes is called responsible, sometimes called sustainable. And as I would understand it, there are three main approaches to ethical investing. There's negative screening, screening out, which Tony's going to mention in terms of divestment. There's looking at the ESG, the environmental, social and governance factors associated with particular companies and engagement with them around that. And then impact and positive investing, which is, I think, more along what we're going to hear about later on this evening. So I just wanted to say something briefly about the engagement piece, because I think that's something where people might feel a bit fearful to engage with, but where there are campaigns and networks that can support you to get involved. So firstly, just a bit on the jargon. ESG gets talked about a lot. There is a huge rise in ESG funds, so funds that you can put your money into that's labelled in a particular way. And it might be that there are particular issues that you are concerned about, whether that's modern slavery or executive pay or the climate, that you might pay particular attention to if you're looking for an investment fund. But the thing that I'm more excited about, I think, and the work that Just Money Movement's been more involved with, and ECCR historically has been involved with, is around engagement and activism. So I just wanted to say something very briefly about that. You're probably aware through your own denominations and faith networks that church investors do quite a lot of work around engagement through their investments. That's about establishing relationships with companies and urging them to change particular policies and practices. If that's not something that you're particularly aware of, then it's worth just reading up a little bit more about what your particular denomination is doing and the kinds of themes that they are engaging around. The people that I know best is the Methodist Church in Britain and their work through Epworth, who manage the finances for the Methodist Church. And it's really exciting reading some of the things that they are engaging around in terms of engaging with mining companies around human rights issues and land right abuses, engaging with companies at a very different kind of level and scale in the UK around nutrition and health and food and looking at how companies and supermarkets can promote healthy eating rather than the reverse. And on a huge range of issues, church investors are having conversations with companies and pushing them to change in a way that is not very visible to us at the grassroots. But it might be worth finding out a little bit more about that if there's a particular issue you're concerned about, to identify whether there's a church investor working on that who could maybe help open the door to a conversation with that company. At a very different level as well, AGM activism is something that we're involved with, which is equipping individuals to go and ask a question of a company board and CEO at their AGM. We're going along to HSBC's AGM in Birmingham on Friday of this week to ask a question around our Don't Bank on Plastics campaign. But there's lots of things that you could do for the particular issue that you're concerned about. Then you can get equipped, you can buy or you can borrow a share. There's lots of training available from the likes of people like Share Action, who can equip you to go in and ask that question. And I think for some people that's a very daunting thing to do, but there's a very supportive network of AGM activists around. So I would say if this is something you haven't done before, then it might be something to consider doing. And yeah, very briefly, another thing that you could get involved with if you are a shareholder is shareholder resolutions, which is joining together with a network of investors to force a vote on a particular issue. Again, quite a technical thing to get involved with, but there is support out there on organisations working on lots of different issues, from the climate crisis through to mental health and well-being, the workplace, all kinds of different issues where there'll be other shareholders out there who have similar issues, and you can join in with them. So I just hope that gives you a few ideas around engaging and the kind of things that we could be involved with and encourage other people to be involved with. And I wanted to just give a little example of engagement as I've seen it happen in the Methodist Church, as I mentioned. So this, I think, was a really interesting story because the engagement has happened both at the grassroots within the Methodist Church, of Methodists in local congregations using the structures of the Methodist Church to push the Methodist Church to declare a climate emergency, and work being done through the Central Finance Board of the Methodist Church and its engagement with companies has kind of led to this this journey that they've been on. So back in 2019, declaring a climate emergency, then divesting from BP in total, and then finally in 2021 divesting from oil and gas completely, including from Shell. And this quote, which I thought was a helpful way of saying, you know, how the tactics of engagement versus divestment might work. So we engaged significantly with Shell over their climate targets. After an inadequate response, the church's patience ran out, and so then divestment became a tactic to use. And I think many of us have been in conversations where people have said, is it about engagement? Is it about divestment? And often it's about both. It's about knowing when to use which tactic for which issue. Divestment is that final, right, we're pulling out of that sector, we're pulling out of that company, and that sends a really powerful message. And I said I'd leave you with some reasons to be hopeful before I hand back to Tony. So I just wanted to say briefly something about 3 organisations that I've come across that I recommend to you and urge you to find out more about. So the first is Operation Noah, and there are similar organisations elsewhere in the world working on the fossil fuel divestment movement. Operation Noah, we work really closely with at Just Money. They have been incredible in inspiring a real grassroots movement in the UK to push faith institutions to divest from fossil fuels. And what I found most empowering and exciting about that is that it's been really intergenerational and multi-faith, that it's been grassroots and it's been institutional led. So it's, I think, a coming together of lots of different voices in a really powerful way. Second is the work of Faith Invest, who've been doing work at quite a high level with different faith groups, so across multi-faith and globally, I think, on faith consistent investing. So helping faith groups think really carefully about things like impact investing. So what kind of world do they want to see? How do they translate that into their investing policies? Lots of really inspiring stories on the Faith Invest website, and I will put these links into the chat in a bit. And the final one is a movement called Resource Generation, which is US based, but I've seen it starting to do more in the UK and in Europe. This is particularly for young people who are seeking a more just distribution of wealth. They are young people who identify as having privilege and having wealth, but they're really seeking a very different way of using and stewarding that wealth. And I just put this final quote on here because I find this a really helpful thing to come back to when I try and explain what ethical investing is and what impact investing is. And I will read it just in case the text is a bit small for some of you to read, but they say this is Resource Generation. This is this young movement in the US. Their questions that they ask about investing. They say impact investing means investing in those most impacted by injustice and trusting their leadership by sharing power and resources. Return, normally understood as what we get financially, should be reconceived as a process of returning to right relationship with people and the planet. And risk, normally understood as the risk of losing money, should be flipped. We must instead ask, who has been placed at risk in order to accumulate wealth, and who is assuming risk to make a new future possible? And I think that's a really helpful, challenging quote to carry with us in our conversations as we think about where we bank, where we invest, and what risk and return look like and who is impacted. I will stop there and hand back to Tony to pick up the strands of thinking about investing.
Right. Well, Tiziana, can I have my prompts back now? Because Rosie, that was impressive, a great deal of information there, and I'm really pleased that we have the chance to study the stuff you've got on your PowerPoint there. We've got a few minutes to spare. We're only just after 7:30 now. Would you be interested or willing to take any questions or comments from the other participants here? Or would we leave that till the end? If anyone wants to make a comment.
Yeah, I can answer things now, or very willing to wait till we've heard.
Well, it's just a question of if one has a comment to make, try and keep it brief. And we all know, we've all experienced people who have a certain sense of grinding axes and so on. I'm not suggesting any of us here will be grinding axes, but nevertheless, it's something not to be welcome. So if you want to put something succinctly, a point of clarification to Rosie, I think we've time to do it. If not, we'll move it till the end. Well, you've still got your access to the chats function, and we did do an analysis last week of that, and I'll come back to that later. So let me move on, if we may, to what I've been take over. So let's see what we've got on this, please. Can we click down? I think there's some points, bullet points to come, Tiziana. Yeah. Yes, okay, we'll put them all up at once, yeah. First point, I think, is just to clarify, I think this was very clear from what Rosie said, but just to emphasize it, I think what I'm going to move on for in the next few minutes or however long it takes, I think, the word investment has lots of different meanings, I think, and that's been made clear. I gave a presentation some years back now to a meeting of Eco Congregation Ireland, and I felt it necessary to make it clear that investment, in the sense of having shares in established companies, does have a drawback. The value of such investment, I think, comes possibly from a share dividend, or possibly from a capital gain. If you can see the market, read the market carefully enough, you buy cheap and sell when things are a little more advanced than when you paid for it. And that's a complex issue in itself. It also has the meaning of being part of what I call, and what others call indeed, the casino economy, in which the whole thing is about trading as though you were in a casino rather than in the real world. I wish to, and my friend and colleague Tiziana wish to talk a little about positive investment, which I define as being raising finance at a community level to meet the needs of our time. There's a distinction which sometimes gets blurred, I think, and that's between bonds and shares. Essentially, a bond is a promissory note to pay in response to a particular sum deposited with the institution or the people or the congregation or whatever it might be. And that bounds the holders of that bond to pay a certain amount of interest. Shares, by the other hand, pay a dividend based upon the surplus that they make. And bonds, with its connection, firm, clear connection with interest, raises a very interesting moral point, which I think could take us a whole of the rest of the evening and several weekends beyond to establish. But a bond is a charge that a bond requires the payment of interest. Remember a conversation or a presentation by Anne Pettifor, some of you may know that name, some years ago now, in which she was really very clear that interest is something which has always been an issue in ethical terms. There's an obligation to pay something for the use of money that other people have had. Not quite the same thing as a share, where you're sharing the surplus. Islamic banking, as many of us probably know, is some sort of what's the word? A fatwa, is it, against interest in financial transactions? It's an issue I don't think there's ever been quite settled one way or another. I think there's been a fudge somewhere in the possibly 17th, 18th century that somehow made it admissible. But anyway, I don't want to dwell too long on that. I simply want to point out the difference between a bond and a share. A share is something for which you get a share of the surplus.
Perfect.
The final, well, not quite the final point, I think. I'm going to present, and my colleague and friend Tiziana will present some things as well on this question of positive investment, I think. We must be very careful, both of us, and I'm sure we are being very careful, that we are neither of us qualified to offer advice. We're drawing attention to possibilities, but advice is what comes from a registered or acknowledged financial services advisor. And we can draw attention to things, but we should not interpret it as advice. And I'll come on in a moment to the work of ethics, but just one other thing crosses my mind. Rosie made some good points, I think, about people's mistakes when they're dealing with questions of finance. It wasn't on this slide, but I think I'd better deal with it now. It may seem a surprise, what I'm going to say is surprising, but banks do not lend the money which savers or other depositors place with them. Banks create wealth, or create credit to be more exact, by a process which is actually very simple accounting. But there's a strong misunderstanding, and it crops up, I see day after day in the newspapers and elsewhere, that banks lend the money which is deposited with them. No, they don't. It seems odd to say it. And it's beginning to be more commonly understood and so on than it used to be, but still it's a misunderstanding. But banks have tremendous power in creating credit, and that's how they mostly work when they are financing something which we disapprove of or ethically find objectionable, such as the arms trade or damage to human rights or that kind of thing. There are many other things I could pick up, and I think Rosie has been very thorough in presenting to us the fact that it's not difficult to come to terms with these ideas, but some of them are quite surprising in their implications. I'm going to move on now to the work of what I suppose you could broadly call an agency called ethics. Well, let's move on, if you would mind, please, Tiziana. Ethics was founded several years ago now, and I couldn't put an exact date on it. It had a fairly slow process of coming into good trading ways. As I see it, it handles proposals and ideas from communities who wish to do something positive in their community. A typical example would be a community who wish to have some form of renewable energy, and they know what can be done. It could be hydro, it could be wind power, it could be solar power. But the intention is, I think, to raise the funding necessary, possibly by means of a share, or maybe in some cases by means of a bond. And ethics will help people, ordinary people, working in collaboration with each other, working in cooperation with each other, to launch an investment appeal. They're regulated by the financial and prudential authorities within the United Kingdom, and they have to keep applying with those regulations and be assessed from time to time as how well they're doing it. I've got, and I can say this cautiously again, some great faith in my encounters and work I've done with ethics over several years. One acquires, sometimes unexpectedly and otherwise, a small sum of money from some source, possibly a bequest or something like that. And then you say, well, what can I best do with it? And I found ethics particularly helpful in this. And I have two examples. The first one is this idea, is solar for schools. A project, again, was set up by a small community who felt that it would be very useful in several ways if schools could be encouraged to put solar panels, photovoltaic panels, in a suitable place in school buildings. It has two values. It will cut down the energy bills for the school itself, and it will provide an opportunity for young people to see what renewable energy and the harvesting of renewable energy can do. So again, speaking strictly from my own experience, I did have some modest investments in solar for schools. Sometimes they wish to make a repayment of the investment, and sometimes it can remain there indefinitely. I took, because they were in a healthy position with what they were trying to do, I took the option to reclaim my investment and place it elsewhere. The second one, which is another example, but very similar to the kind of work that Essex do, the Ecological Land Co-operative. There's some pictures there on the, as I look at the screen on my right-hand side of the screen, which illustrate the kind of work they're doing. Develops small, low-impact, small holdings for ecological agriculture. By ecological, I mean that's processes that respect the gifts of nature and which provide us with decent food, with no additives, with nothing that poisons the soil and nothing that has dangers to our own health. It's small scale, but small is beautiful, and we need to recognize that, particularly for the times we're living in. I think small is beautiful. The title of a book by E.F. Schumacher, as many of you I'm sure remember, something which I think will come back a lot more to the way we run our lives, we run what we call the economy, run, to be a better word, run our societies. That implies cooperation. And I think that may be the point at which to ask Tiziana to talk about community shares. Just one more. Have I got something more there? No, I haven't. No, okay. Tiziana, are you ready to rock and roll, if that's the right way of putting it?
Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you. Yes, I am ready. Let us start with a bit overview of who I work with. My organization is called the Co-operative Alternatives. I'm a cooperative development practitioner. My name is Tiziana O'Hara, and we are based in Northern Ireland. We are our main job is actually to develop cooperatives in the north of Ireland, and we've been doing that since 2013. Wow. Today, we are talking about community shares as a typical tool used by cooperative to raise capital. And I hope that you can see the relevance with this conversation. In the sense that the community shares are very typical and very different from ordinary shares. So they offer an opportunity to people to invest their money in something that is quite different. So let us go down and start to really unpack what are community shares. Community shares are a unique type of share. So they are money used to raise money to get started or to grow a community business that serves that community. So the community shares that we are talking about are this unique tool that is only available to cooperatives and community benefit society. Cooperatives and community benefit society do belong to the same family. They are cooperatives in nature, both of them. And both of them can offer shares. They are patient capital and they are flexible capital. When we raise money through community shares, what we are asking people is to invest their money for a long time. Most of the time, we are not even asked to take the money back. We ask them to be patient with their investment, and we don't give a fixed payback date. We are also very flexible, And we ask people that invest in this type of organization to be very flexible in what they expect as return. There is no fixed interest rate most of the time. But what shares give to the members that invest in this type of organization is that they become co-owner. They can participate in the running of the organization. They have a say in what the cooperative is able to do and in what direction they want to go. Members may get a fair return for sure, but what is most interesting that the members get the community benefit. They may get something out of for the environment or to maintain a service that that community wants to maintain, like a post office, like a greengrocer. So community shares are, yes, shares, yes, they are an investment, but they are a very, very particular investment. What are the main three characteristics of shares in this context? The first one is that it's one member, the principle one member, one vote stands in cooperative structures. It's not one share, one vote. And that means that no matter how much money I can invest or I can afford to invest, my voice stays equal or is equal to the voice of the people that has put more money into the organization. So for instance, I can buy 100 shares and my voting rights is still one vote. The same as whoever has bought maybe 10,000 shares. In companies, this is not what happened. In companies, you have one share, one vote. This is why the more share you have, the bigger is your voice. But not in a cooperative context. It's one member, one vote. The second characteristic of this share in cooperatives is that withdrawal is not transferable. So the only way to take your money out is for the cooperative to buy your shares. You cannot buy or transfer that to somebody else outside the cooperative or even the stock market. We cannot do that. Final characteristic of these shares is that the value of the share may decrease, but it will not increase. And that really attracts only one type of investor or member, the type that doesn't want to speculate or guess the value of the share in the future, because your share will maintain the same value through time. But you can lose money. You can lose your money. You can lose the value of it. This is why, as any other investment, you need to be careful of what you are putting in this organization. So community shares that are also called withdrawable shares are not similar, are not company shares. And ETEX is one of the platforms where you can find this type of investment. They are always referred as withdrawable shares. And you can see that they've been quite popular. And the kind of popularity of this type of investment has gone step by step with the increasing popularity of cooperatives. So cooperatives, in fact, are organizations that allowed a joint-owned, democratically controlled enterprise, and they are really governed by principles and values. So it's value-driven and principle-driven organization. And it's in this context that those shares are actually defined. And those principles and this definition are actually embedded in the legal document of cooperatives and community benefit societies. So when you are going through big platform like eTex and you wanted to give a look at what a community share investment could look like, you should look at the legal government, the legal governing documents that will embed these principles. But how popular have been community shares in the UK? Well, so far, in the past more or less 10 years, across all UK, so Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland and England, there have been 210 million raised in community shares by about 130,000 members to help 504 businesses. And this has happened through 710 offers. So it means that some businesses, some societies have went back with a second share offer to their members and asked for more investment, more capital investment. In what sectors we have seen community share being used? Well, very much across many sectors that have kind of needed capital, especially after the 2008 financial crisis. And if there were businesses that were starting up and they couldn't get any money from banks or loans from financial institutions, community share became an opportunity for them to raise that capital. So we have seen the use of community shares in farms, turbines, solar panels, even for potteries, for people, for a group or a community business that wanted to create potteries, garden centers, co-working spaces, magazines, piers, especially in Scotland, ferry boats, broadband facilities, student homes, student housing, post offices, distilleries, whiskies in Scotland, cinemas, music venues. So you can see the variety of businesses that have set up as cooperatives and have raised the capital they needed to start or to grow their business from their members. So community shares have supported many of these initiatives. Most of these initiatives were actually grassroots initiatives. So if we're talking about football clubs, maybe it was a small football clubs, community-based, that really needed some capital to renew their football pitch, for instance. And we saw that happening. So this type of investment has been kind of attracting the investment from a wide range of membership to sustain businesses in their communities. So they were addressing the needs of that community through businesses and tried to really make this kind of possibility open to the many. So in some sort of way, community share have, first of all, demystify what is investment for many people, because has made accessible and affordable to some people to put some of their own disposable income into organization that would have had a return or an impact in their own life. We've done some national kind of UK-based reports and research on community share, and we are part of this research. We've been part of this research, and I wanted to share with you some of these findings. When you have businesses, community businesses supported by community share, we find out that 92% of this business are still trading today and are still trading after 5 years, when normal businesses would probably collapse. So after 5 years, you have normal, ordinary businesses asking for investment in the general way where you can, ordinary way to ask investments. They only 46% of these businesses are surviving. 92% of the businesses that have raised capital through the community instead are still trading today. 85% are also say that running a community share offer had a positive impact on financial performance. What does it mean? We find that if a member puts their money into those businesses, usually that member becomes a customer, a supporter, a volunteer. So it increases the financial performance of that particular business. Think about a local greengrocer, a local post office that is run by the community for the community. Second finding, we find out that the community shares make investment accessible, giving people a stake and saying what matters to them. Interestingly, we found that out of that 130,000 community investors, 41% are female. If you compare that type of investment behavior with angel investors, you will see that only 9% of angel investors are actually female. And look at the other statistic, that's very interesting as well. 56% of people investing in community share earn around £35,000. So that is the average kind of wage of in England. And only 4% of investors earn over 100,000 £100,000. What does it mean? It means that the well-off are not attracted to this investment. It's the people that really is in the community and could get the benefit from this organization that most likely are investing. Finding number 3, there are another couple, and that's I will close this report, but it's available to you. You can see it there, the actual link to the report, and it's public. Community share have a significant potential to reduce inequality and level up society. In which way? Well, 80% of people invested in community shares offer because of the wider social and environmental benefit. They don't do it because they have a financial return, but because they have a social and environmental return. There are impacts that they benefit from. 78% have also invested outside of their locality. And that is that kind of probably wealth redistribution that we really see, where people that have disposable income may actually invest in areas where more deprived, just because they have maybe a social connection. They come from there, they have a family there, they have friends there. It's interesting. This is a bit more of a breakdown for your own interest, and just to prove the point that people do not usually invest in community share for financial returns. Less than 20% they do that. 17, that's the last line on your graph. Less than 20% do invest in community share because they want a financial return. Most of them is because they want a social or environmental benefit. They want the post office working. They want the cinema, the local cinema still available to them. They want the solar panels and turbines because they are environmentalists and they really are interested in renewable energy. They also believe that in the structure of the cooperatives, they really believe that they have a say when they invest in those type of community share offer. Number 4, when we see an investment from the community, we also see a equal or a bit more investment from funders, government, and institutional investors. What does it mean? That when you have the buy-in of your community, then other people start to pay attention, other funders, government, other financial institution. So for every pound, you can have an additional 1.18 of pounds of leverage through grants, loans, and institutional investment. That didn't happen very much in Northern Ireland, but more in areas like Scotland, England, and Wales. Oh. In Northern Ireland, we done so far in the past more or less 10 years, 15 community shares. We have raised overall around 2.5 million of shares. From 5,500 members. Our local share offer have been about community-owned breweries, community renewables, like the example that Tony was given. Nice and Drumlin are both renewable cooperatives. Community buildings, farms and lands. We have one community-owned farm called the Jubilee Farm. We have a community sports and leisure, Ballymacash Sports Academy. We have 2 now community-owned shop, Ethical Way, that is in Eglinton near Derry, and Carrick Greengrocer, that is in Carrickfergus. I wanted to talk about, in particular, about 2 of these examples, and then I will definitely wrap up just to give you a feeling of what the community share offer can offer. So this is the Northern Ireland Community Energy. It was established in 2014. They have raised about £250,000 from 82 members. The most common investment, the medium, it's around £1,000. And what they did with that money, they installed the solar panels on 18 community centers across Northern Ireland. We didn't do it in schools, like the example from Tony, because the school have a different regulation in Northern Ireland and a different kind of routes to get the solar panel on their roof. So we decided to put them on other organizations like community centers or social enterprises that could still benefit from having a solar panel on their roof. In total, we have installed 190 kilowatt of arrays. And with that, we have reduced, like Tony was saying very, very clearly, we have reduced the bill of the energy bill for each community center, to the point that the community center would pay, by using the solar energy produced by the solar panel, to 1/3 of their bill, the normal bill. We were also able, and we are still able, this is a current cooperative, we are still able to pay a 4% return on the investment to each of our members. But we are not using all our surplus for the members. That's not our aim. Our aim has been to create a community fund that is predicted to reach £90,000, so that this surplus will then help to build or to pay for new solar panels or a new renewables initiatives in the future. Who are the members of this particular community benefit society? A variety of people. They are environmentalists, people that do believe that renewables are an important part of our energy system. There have been some other cooperatives who have also invested in this initiative to support what they wanted to do. There have been one church that actually have also invested in this organization. So the 82 members, they didn't do it really most of the time for the return, the 4% return, even if that was predicted. And it was quite appealing at the time, in 2014, remember? You could only get 1% if you had your money in the bank. So one of the arguments that we were saying is, say, do something positive with your money, help some of the organization that are in the most deprived area. The photograph you saw there, it's actually North Belfast, and that is the Ashton Centre. And they are really building and putting the solar panel on their roof. The other case study that I wanted to give it to you or share with you tonight, it's Carrick Greengrocers. Carrick Greengrocers is an initiative that wants to open up, run and manage a greengrocer in Carrickfergus. This offer has just been open and has been only open for 3 weeks. They have already raised £16,000 from 200 members. Most of the people, most of the members are from the area in Carrickfergus, that where the shop will be open. There is a very, very affordable minimum investment of £25, and there is a maximum investment of £5,000 if you can. The most common investment to date is £100. And why people do invest that? They've already kind of interviewed some of their members. Why people feel they need to support a greengrocer in their area? Because maybe they want fresh and local food, because they wanted to regenerate the town center, because that's what where the shop will be, in the town center, and the town centers of Carrickfergus looks now depleted and derelict, and so there is an aspiration to bring people back to the center of the village. Of course, they wanted to create employment opportunities, and it's predicted that Carrick Greengrocer will have at least 1 employee from day one. And they wanted to generate some kind of interest from the community to what is community life. And they think the greengrocer will be something more than a place where to buy greens, but it would be a place where people can meet, can share story, can share also memories, but also can share services. We have seen a greengrocer opening in many parts of the UK. It's interesting to see how community shares have, we're talking tonight about this movement of people, movement for change, and how these ideas have actually mobilized some of the people around these 2 initiatives, greengrocer and energy. There are plenty of resources if you wanted to know a bit more about what are community shares. Again, I agree with Tony that we are not invite you to invest in community share. We invite you to learn about community share as an alternative, a positive way to use your money, if you can, if you have that disposable income, to support the service and the organization, the community business that they are in your area. You can go to Cooperatives UK, and the two reports are there. We'll be happy to answer any question. And now I stop sharing.
Well, Tiziana, you and I had not rehearsed this beforehand, so I felt I'd learned a great deal from some of the information you gave us there. And the whole thing presents a kind of total difference to neoliberalism, what I referred to at the start of this event this evening. Neoliberalism is all about me as the individual, and I run the race and I win or I don't win. Whereas this is about genuine development of communities, something which is still something of a challenge, I think, in this part of Ireland. There's other things I could ask you, but I won't do it because we have other things to do with it, I think. I said at this stage in an email to Rosie earlier on, just after lunch, I think, that she drew my attention to something that could well be an interesting follow-up to the themes we've been exploring here. And I wonder if I could ask you, Rosie, now to tell us what she sent me or shared with me earlier this afternoon.
Of course, I only came across this last week, but it's an event, a webinar that's happening next week online on the 9th of May. And it's organised by, amongst others, the World Council of Churches and the UN Environment Programme. I've just signed up to it, and I know that Tony's interested in attending. I think it's open to anyone that's interested, particularly in how we engage with banks around the climate crisis, and looking at it through the lens of, I think, intergenerational justice and how we protect the future for children, grandchildren, next generation to come. It'll be really interesting to see, I think, who else is at that meeting, which other networks are represented. But I think it'd be great if Church and Peace were there contributing. There's some really interesting speakers. I will put the link into the chat, but I know that Tiziana has the details as well, which she can circulate afterwards.
Well, thank you, Rosie. Yes, it was a surprising outcome. I think this, as we know, is the last session of what we started a couple of weeks, well, last week actually. And, you know, I've been spending time wondering, well, where do we go from here and how do we go in develop the ideas we've been presented with? And this may well be an opportunity. It's not the only one, but it's something that suggests that the issues are not just about small town politics or economics. They've gone to the level of the World Council of Churches. And that's an impressive achievement. As I said in an email mid-afternoon, I think, from Belfast to the World Council of Churches, this is quite an impressive achievement. But this is the way things are developing and the way things can and must develop, I think. And I think Tiziana made the point very clearly that money has power to good. And it also has, as we discovered last week, as some of us did, I guess, a power to really do very damaging things, to finance fossil fuel, to finance the arms industry, to ride roughshod over human rights and so on. So we've a few more things to do, I think, and then we have to say farewell for the moment, at least. So could we go back to my PowerPoint, please? And I'll just try and sum up. Yes, we move forward a bit. Summing up, this is, I think, one aspect of what I want to do before we close, but nevertheless, just to warn us, as we think we knew already, the world of finance is full of pitfalls, and it's not only the banks. Rosie touched on this fact that insurance premiums and pension fund contributions may be invested in activities which run contrary to one's ethical principles, or threats to the environment, for example, the arms trade, and many others that we've heard about this evening. The Just Money website has more detail to offer. Is your pension building a better world? An article by the predecessor of out of which Just Money came, the Ecumenical Council for Corporate Responsibility, also has something there accessible through the internet. And then the ethical consumer seemed to really have this idea in grasp at the moment, because to my amazement and surprise, the issue of the ethical consumer for May and June this year came through my door a few days ago, and they are picking up other aspects of the financial sector. And it makes both interesting in reading and in some cases rather grim reading, that the financial sector is full of people trying to do entirely the wrong things for the times we're living in. Just move on if you would, please, Tiziana. I spent some time wondering if we could adequately, well, we're never going to do it adequately, I think, but one of the contributors last week to the first round of this webinar made this point, and others gave supportive indications to it. What was said was that it's not just about banks, but about changing the dominant economic model. And I think we've had two aspects of that presented this evening. One was my brief comments on neoliberalism as almost the last set of ideas that we need to develop any further. It's capitalism on steroids, you might say, and to move away from growth of the economy to one of simplicity. And Tiziana's illustrations of what community shares have achieved, I think, illustrates that these things are not beyond our grasp, and they do not require vast sums of finance, and they do good. And there's a lot more to say and a lot more to do about it. We've about 10 minutes left, and I think if we could share any thoughts on that, how do we interpret this sense of where do we go from here? What do we do next? Undoubtedly, on people's uncertain sense or lack of confidence about how does capitalism, how does finance work, is holding us back in some respects. But nevertheless, it's up to us, I think, now to try and interpret it and try further ways of keeping in touch with each other. So, I'll say no more. The floor is open to the participants, insofar as there's a floor.
Sandra has the hands up.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, two things. That it's been excellent, thank you. I do have some shares in community energy, and there are two comments in relating to that. They're solar panels on schools, and it has brought communities together locally. I did raise the issue about mining last week, because it's a separate project I'm involved in, but worldwide, and I'm afraid this is why I don't think it's totally right just to concentrate on your own immediate area. There are lots of positives, but it is calculated that by 2030, 2/3 of the world's poorest will live in resource-rich sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America, and they are the people who do the mining for the minerals which go into just about every bit of green technology we have, and also weapons. All the EU, the USA, and the UK now are developing critical minerals strategies, because the demand for these is huge, and it does need thinking about. So I totally applaud what you said at the end. We need we need to look at the whole economy but we don't need to be too simplistic about what we're actually offering locally, because there are implications globally.
Very good.
Very well said, Sandra. I would not disagree at all. But we also needed to build our consciousness and ask for these questions. So it's only when we started to see consumers asking questions, for instance, in our small greengrocer that doesn't want to use plastic, it doesn't want to use excessive wastage. They wanted to use green energy for the light in their shop. Consumers needs to demand that as well. So in this kind of small organization, we hope that the people we attract are also the people that could actually ask for the change that will create a global change.
We have a few minutes left if anyone wants to contribute. Some interesting things coming up on the chat. And of course, I mentioned an email address.
Eleanor, yeah, Tony, there are a couple of chat there, but sorry, I don't want to. Rosie, do you want to say something before I there is one question, quick question. Can established church or community apply for community share?
Yes.
Eleanor, yes, they can, but it really depends on how the church view their own investment.
Okay.
Be careful. These are very risky investment, Eleanor. These are not, investment protected by the usual protection that investment may afford to. So you needed to be careful. But some churches have given us some of their money. Yeah.
I'll just add to that I know of churches that have developed ethical investment policies where they've said 10% of their kind of investment portfolio they're willing to put towards impact investing, which is at a higher risk. So yeah, there's a kind of mix and match approach I think that some churches and meetings take to do what they want to do with the money, which is that positive impact.
Well, I thought Tiziana's examples were fantastic, and they were very broad as well. Most of us, I think, could do well to get engaged at a more local level initially. I mean, I do understand that there needs to be policy change and global change and all that, but I do agree that people learn a lot from actually taking part in their own economy locally. And that's another very important approach. So I think it needs to be a sort of two-pronged approach, if you like. But the other thing is that when I was married in 1972, I received a gift of shares in a local cooperative. So it's been going a long time, and nothing's new. It's all being rethought again to meet the needs of today's society, and that's really good. And I think we need to make alliances with a good broad range of people. I mean, I've thought of those who are running community businesses, for example. They may not be the same as cooperatives, but they have the same kind of ethos and aims. And there are lots of those around, and lots of other people who are engaging in alternative energy and all sorts of other things. So, I mean, I think this is very exciting. I found this evening's seminar really interesting, and I hope, I hope we now go out and talk to other people about it and engage people and find out what's happening and what we can get involved in straight away.
Yeah. Thank you, Felicity. Yes, there's one other thing I have in mind, but I'd like to keep, well, we've about 2 or 3 minutes if anyone wants to make a further comment or suggestion or come up with something.
Tony, may I just say one final thing?
Yes.
Just to say that one of the things that we're doing more work around in Just Money Movement is Good Money Week, which happens in October every year. Some people might be aware of. The dates this year are from the 2nd to the 6th of October. That's the Monday to Friday. And on the 8th of October is Good Money Sunday, which again, we're trying to raise the profile of. It's something that ECCR used to do work around, but I don't think it's commonly known among faith communities as a kind of week when you can have these, use that as a starting point, use Good Money Week in October as a opportunity, a bit like for Fair Trade Fortnight has been a time to kind of get together and talk about fair trade. Good Money Week could be an opportunity for our communities and our networks to have these conversations, to maybe get newsletters and articles in magazines and local newspapers or host events, and there'll be things that people can join online as well. And so I will put those dates in the chat just to remind people.
Yes, thank you for reminding me about that, Rosie. Yeah. Could I have my PowerPoint back, please? There's a couple of points I'd like to make, and as we're pretty close to the time we said we'd wind up, and we'll move on, please. Just the next couple of slides, I think. Well, I think it's time. Sadly, it's been an interesting experience for me, and I hope for all of us who've taken some way, to offer thanks in particular to Lydia and Rosie for their encouragement to pursue this topic. I have to admit, I wondered if it wouldn't turn out to be rather dry, and it didn't. It's been quite lively in all kinds of ways, and there's still much to be done. To Bridget in particular for her work on describing the development of the Northern Mutual Bank, which she presented last week, and to Tiziana in particular for her friendship and sharing her wide experience in organising events and in Zoom hosting. I say these things with genuine sincerity. It's been an extraordinary experience for me, I think, and one which I was a little daunted when it started. Now, just one more slide, please, and if you may. Yes, an appeal from Just Money, which I intended to make last week, but it's come up now on the screen. An appeal from Just Money. Donations are welcome. It doesn't have to be much, but I think we've seen in Rosie's contribution the scope and understanding and issues with which she and her colleagues are involved, and I think a small donation would be something very valuable. So I think we're going to say goodbye and good night for the moment, but maybe we meet again. Perhaps ideally in a real room with real people. No, I'm not saying you're not real people. I'm just saying there's a sense that it's nice to be with people as distinct from see them as images on the screen. Anything more to be said? Or shall we go and do what the next big thing is? Or we'll be circulating as best we can various links.
Can I say something, Tony?
Yes, please.
Nobody has a thank you for your time and your dedication and your contribution. And I think that, Tony, you have been an inspiration for me particularly. The first share offer we've done in Northern Ireland was because Tony put me in contact with the people that wanted to do share offers. So thank you for being there to support us in our journey of rediscovery. I agree with Felicity. Sometimes we discover what is already there, been there, but we need you guys to keep us right in some sort of way. So
Yes,
thank you, Tony.
We likely also, we men need you women to come to the fore a bit more. To tell us when we're wrong or tell us that we're talking nonsense or whatever. And that would apply to a certain group of people whose profession is that of politician. We part hoping to meet again on some occasion, whether individually or one-to-one, I don't know. Ellen, are you trying? No, are we checking out? All right, thanks for all your contributions.
Thanks, Tony. I was just looking to see in the Coleraine area, see somebody there referring to it. So anyway, we'll hear from you, Tony, hopefully again, and thanks a million.
We'll be sending some stuff around which will support in documentary form the kind of issues we've been trying to talk about over the last
Yeah.
2 years. And with that
Be
said,
nice, be nice to use what's his name's offer in Queens to have a seminar like the one we met up a few weeks ago.
yes,
Oh,
but then we have people here from very, very diverse
well,
parts
that's true.
of these offshore islands.
Yeah.
Friends of mine from Manchester who have got informed through my connection with Quakers in the Manchester area.
Oh,
And
very good. Yeah.
it's also been nice to have the compliments about the Methodist Church. And we've got a friend here, Richard Clark, who is possibly considers himself, I don't know, to be a retired Methodist minister, but retired is hardly the word I'd use to describe you, Richard. But that's meant as a compliment. So, yeah.
Thanks, Tony.
All right, friends, we part and look forward to keeping in
Thank
touch.
you.